And if you need a book, raise your hand. We're on our lesson 4, studying from the book of Daniel. Anybody need a book? No books. All right, good. All right. Well, before we get into the lesson, Brother Johnny, will you care to lead us in a word of prayer? Well, the title of our lesson today is The Golden Image, and it's really part 1. The story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I was joking with Chris. Chris has got the next week lesson. I'll try not to jump all over it. For me, if I'm going to speak for 30 minutes, I need a lot of material, and this one didn't really, the way they divided it up into 2 lessons, it's going to be a struggle for me to make it to 30 minutes, but we'll do the best we can, and especially trying to give us a good introduction to Chris's lesson next week. And it was kind of the last 2 lessons, I thought, with Jackie and Johnny. It was a split right down there where it's kind of hard teaching the first lesson, and you don't want to jump on the second lesson. But this has always been one of my favorite Bible stories. And I think back to all the VBSs and all the Bible classes that you sit through as a kid, this story comes up quite a bit. And it was always one I was very fond of. But before we, jump into the quarterly, chapter 4, the lesson will be coming from Daniel chapter 3. Let's turn back to Daniel chapter 2 and kind of pick up where we left off last week. I'm not sure exactly how much time has passed by since the last lessons we had from Daniel chapter 2, where we had Nebuchadnezzar having his dream of this big image and this big statue, and Daniel being the only one who could interpret that dream. But at the end of that chapter, and beginning in verse 46, Daniel and his friends get a big promotion. And prior to that, Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were first mentioned in chapter 1, where they had been able to abstain from some of the king's feast and the preparation plans that they were under in Babylon, and then they were proven to be so exceptional because of their trust in God and commitment to their faith. But after Daniel interprets the dream, and verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and an incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. And just going back, the king, he had the dream. He wouldn't tell anybody about the dream, but he wanted them to tell him what the dream was and interpret it. And all the wise men of Babylon, they were unable to tell the king the dream, but God revealed it to Daniel, and Daniel had no trouble with that. In verse 48, then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also, Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So you see, due to the interpretation of that dream, Daniel was promoted quite significantly. And I don't know that we mentioned this. I think we mentioned it last week, but it's also very similar to Joseph. When Joseph was able to interpret the king's dream, he was promoted. So you see Daniel that's come a long ways from his time in Israel, and then he's been transported over was one of the I guess the more elite slaves, and he was put through that training process. And through interpreting that dream, he was promoted over all of Babylon. And he took his friends and he kind of set them aside as to be his helpers, and then they were promoted above all these wise men in Babylon. So that brings us into our lesson in chapter 3. And I always thought it was interesting. I think Chris mentioned it in his lesson that Daniel, the book of Daniel is titled Daniel. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their names are actually, that's not their Jewish names. That's their Babylonian names. And those names are likely relate to some of the gods that they worshipped in Babylon. All three of their names relate to some form or fashion of some deity that they worshiped there. And King Nebuchadnezzar likely did that. You see kind of intermingling between the faith and gods and idolatry into the people. And I think he does that to signify that, they're all one. And as you see the rulers of the ancient times, they use these. The ancient pharaohs, they were thought to be gods. Alexander the Great, I wasn't aware of that, but most people thought that he was some form of deity as well. And you see some of the Roman emperors throughout history that elevate themselves to that status. But we see that their naming could have been an attempt for Nebuchadnezzar to kind of promote them and lift them up to, and just make all the people who over the kingdom realize that maybe Nebuchadnezzar was some form of deity himself, and then his people were that way. And this, like I said, this served the purpose throughout all of history, just to elevate their power. People are not necessarily going to revolt. They may revolt against a man, but once you start to look at a god, it just gives them more esteem, more power, and more control over the people. And I had this question as I was looking at that. It said, is this practice still used today? Can you think of any examples where this kind of thing is still used in our modern era? And the one that come to my mind was North Korea. They still, their rulers over the last several decades have elevated themselves up to a deity of status. In that way, that really does suppress the people, and it feels like it elevates them and further gives them the power they need to control over the people. But that was a country that does that. Can you think of any others? And then I thought, using that concept of elevating yourself to God's status to exert some kind of control and power, you see that in cult leaders a lot of the times. A lot of times they feel like they've got this big vision or this big direct contact from God, and that's why they've been able to convince people to do that. So some of those practices are still certainly used today in various forms and fashions. And according to the author of the Quarterly, he said this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar we're going to look at is going to build likely suggests that he built it in his own image. Now, it doesn't really say that, but they cited so many examples of during that time period where they would build a statue of a god, but then the person who was issuing that, the king who was issuing that god to be built, say that would be Zeus or whoever it was, they would build it in their own image. So when the people would look at this statue of Zeus or this statue, this golden image, they would see in most likelihood the likeness of their king. So some little tactics they were using here to kind of, I guess, convince the people of their power and authority. All right, let's read the first 3 verses here in chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. And here's your question of the day. How long is a cubit? You know the answer to that? Very good. That's exactly, that's right. Basically, if you're looking at a good measurement, it's from your fingertips to your elbow. So maybe 1.5 feet is if you look measurement-wise. So for it to be 60 cubits tall, that relates to about 90 feet tall. Depending on which finger you use, Jackie, it would vary a few inches. It would be. But of course, yeah, it would vary quite a bit, wouldn't it? You're right. But it's a 90-foot, basically a 90-foot statue, and anytime I think of feet, it's easier for me to measure yards. It's in football yards, so that's about 30 yards. So pretty significant statue for that time. And if you looked at the width, 6 cubits, it's about 9 feet wide. So I'm not sure exactly how long these pews are. Does anybody know off the top of their head? Somebody probably knows that. They look to be about 9 feet to me. They may be longer. 11. Okay, so that's pretty close. So that's how wide, as you think about it being about right here, and then significantly tall. So in comparison to one of the ancient wonders of the world, the Colossus of Rhodes. I don't know. I couldn't. I've seen pictures of it in my past, but I couldn't bring to one to my memory. And I wasn't meant to look it up, but some of you've probably seen that. I don't think it's in existence now, but that statue was probably around 70 to 120 feet tall. So this image that Nebuchadnezzar is building is quite massive. Yeah. Hard to imagine in our time with the technology we have how much we struggle to build things, and how they were able to build things with very limited tools and things like that. So yeah, they could take a time. They could build something over 40, 50 years, and that'd be okay. They were more committed to the task, I guess, than we are. But you basically just think you've got this massive statue, likely in the image of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's see. So it brings us to verse 2. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All right. So you see a big gathering of people here. And I guess these are one of those things that you read these verses and you really don't sit down and think about what all these verses entail. But Babylon had basically conquered the world of that time, the ancient civilization. I don't need to flip back in my Bible and look at the map, but you can see that area that they covered basically from Israel over around closer to India area, Iraq area. I'm not exactly sure where that went, but a massive area. So the king's building this big statue, and if you think about the statue, I meant to talk about this earlier. It's ironic that he just has this vision and dream of a big statue. And then the next chapter over, a few verses over, he's got this idea, I want to build me a big statue. So I thought that was quite ironic. But you've got this big image. It's being constructed. It's being built. It's massive. So the next thing is to plan out what we're going to do with it. And the plan is to have people worship it and fall down on it at certain periods of the day. So that's easy if you're around the image, and the image is in the plains of Dura. But say if you're in Israel, or if you're in these other Syria or these locations where you can't see it. So there had to be a lot of logistics on getting this word out. So you see this gathering of all these people who could probably help implement this plan throughout the whole kingdom of Babylon. So they're going to the dedication of the statue. And let's get into the logistics of how exactly this thing is going to be constructed. Or not how it's going to be constructed, but how we're going to go through the process of worshiping it and bowing down to it, and what happens if we don't. So let's look in verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning furnace. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So what do we see from this text? That all these different providences and cities and towns need. What do they need to implement this plan? They need a band, basically. They need a lot of musical instruments. I'm not sure what some of those are. But the way they set it up was in all these towns, communities, they're going to have basically a band, small band, and at certain periods of time, they're going to play music, and then everybody's going to bow down in towards the image, whatever direction it might be in, and worship it. I thought about that a little bit, because they say all at certain periods of the day, they bow down and pray towards Mecca. So I thought about that too. So it'd be everywhere, wouldn't it? Yeah, I've never thought about that. That's right. But if you look at that example of Islam, now imagine you throw in bands in all the towns in the world, and when instead of, I guess in that area they do have some kind of noise usually that signifies that time of day, I think, for prayer. But in our civilization area here we don't. But just imagine you have bands in all those areas now that are notifying and telling, and they're playing a symphony of music, and that's the time you got to do it. So you've got the people doing that, and then the next prong of that is really enforcement. So we've got the band set up in all the towns and communities. We make sure everybody knows what direction they need to pray at, and then the third prong of that is how are we going to punish these people who don't do it? So a pretty good little legislative move for King Nebuchadnezzar to orchestrate all this across his whole kingdom. But the punishment is quite severe. It is to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And let's finish up our reading in verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the provinces of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Now I think we kind of understand a little bit more of the motive, to me, behind all this. And it doesn't specifically say this, but I guess I had always kind of thought about this was why King Nebuchadnezzar did this. I'd always thought that these people maybe convinced him to build this statue and convinced him to issue this ordinance in an attempt to uproot these slaves who are now over them. And if you think back to the end of chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, just think of this concept, has promoted Daniel, a young slave, over all of the provinces of Babylon, over all these Chaldeans. And Daniel has in turn promoted his friends above them. So do you think that set well with the normal wise men and the Chaldeans and the normal Babylonians? It couldn't have set well with them. So you see, and again, as far as we know, it doesn't say, but Nebuchadnezzar builds this image, and these people, whether it was their instruction of Nebuchadnezzar or Nebuchadnezzar's idea on his own, they took advantage of that because they knew that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they would not be bowing down to this image because they did not worship this god or the gods of the Babylonians. So they immediately took advantage of this situation in order to make a political move. And they are able to kind of convince the king that, these people, they've not obeyed your ordinance. Let's go throw them in the fiery furnace. What other Old Testament situation did this kind of remind you of? I had an idea where it reminded me of something. I studied on it, and it wasn't as closely as I thought, but maybe there's something else out there I didn't think about. But you see, kind of a political play here. And the story I had was Esther. But once I started looking at it, it wasn't quite as close as I wanted. But you see, in the story of Esther, you see a government official working with the king to, I guess, convince him to do something that was beneficial for him. You see Haman, he was trying to convince the King Xerxes at that time to really eradicate all the Jews because he felt like he had been slighted by Mordecai. So, and then you had the hero Esther kind of coming in and orchestrating a change right then. But as we're going to see next week, God kind of reaches out to these three Jewish men and saves them. Johnny? Yeah. That's what I read. Go ahead. That's what I could not figure out. And then there's probably, I don't know, that's what they said about the book of Daniel. It's kind of hard to peg down the time periods that it goes from chapter to chapter. But it does seem like these stories go pretty close together. Because you have the vision of the golden, the statue. You have Nebuchadnezzar and kind of being told through God, through Daniel, that, you're this head of gold right here. And then the next chapter over, you've got Nebuchadnezzar thinking, I want to build a golden statue. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And maybe if his kingdom is going to fall, maybe this statue will last forever. Maybe he's trying to look at his legacy. Maybe he was trying to maybe overcorrect against what God had commanded. Maybe. Yeah. But you see that nobody could interpret that dream but Daniel. And you see, like you said, Johnny, at the end, he's kind of all in on Daniel's God. But we'll see hopefully next week that Nebuchadnezzar kind of has an aha moment. Yeah, like maybe this is the right God. So we'll look at that next week. And pride had to hit Nebuchadnezzar when he's told that your kingdom is going to be absorbed, it's going to be destroyed, and so in his mind, I guarantee he probably didn't think about that much because he had a mighty, mighty kingdom and really was not opposed very much during his reign. One more thing I thought was quite kind of ironic, that you see the Jewish people, they're in captivity in Babylon. And what are they in their captivity for? Right. And they had been guilty of worshiping idols. So now you've got the king, and with all these Jewish people in slavery, and they're supposed to bow down and worship idols. How many of those Jewish people do you think had 1 minute of thought or hesitation about bowing down and worshiping that idol? Probably not many. They had come from that idolatry. So it was real easy for them, I would say, once the king threatened to throw them in fire, that they would all bow down and worship this idol. And that, I guess, reinforces the faith of these young Jewish men right here, that they were able to reject that. But that's the kind of courage that God wants us to have. And if we're going to please Him, we've got to be we've got to be faithful even against those kinds of situations and odds. You see in Revelations that God really does, He expects His saints to die for His cause. And I think we need to think hard about our faith and how strong it is. That's all I have. Anybody have any more comments or anything?